My name is Jeremy Shiner. I'm a 2019 GLI alum and currently serve on the Associate Board of the New England region. I am pleased to introduce our next and final speaker, Van Jones. Jones is a CNN political contributor, the current CEO of Reform, an alliance dedicated to fighting for criminal justice reform and giving voice to the voiceless. Jones has founded and led many thriving social enterprises, including the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, Color of Change, and the Dream Corps, a social justice accelerator that houses Yes We Code, Green for All, and Cut 50. Mr. Jones is a Yale-educated attorney and the author of 3 New York Times best-selling books: Beyond the Messy Truth, How We Came Apart, How We Come Together, The Green Collar Economy, and Rebuild the Dream, about his journey as an environmental and human rights activist to becoming a White House policy advisor.
I am so happy I got a chance to hear Andrew Yang. I'm still Yang Gang. I still have hopes that he'll get a chance to bring that energy and that excitement to higher levels. I'm also very, very happy and proud to be here with you. You know, everything good in the country historically has happened when African Americans and Jewish Americans have gotten together. If you look at the labor movement, if you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at movement after movement after movement, crisis after crisis, it's when Black and Jewish leadership gets together, we put the country on our back and we just take it to a different place and a better place. And unfortunately, that history of Black-Jewish cooperation, a Black-Jewish alliance, is not told. It's not taught. And so people don't understand the importance of these two groups. But there's a reason that the Nazis hate both of us. There's a reason that the Klan hates both of us, explicitly and aggressively. That said, if there ever were a time to renew the bonds of affection between our communities, this would be that time. We are really at a crossroads as a country, and people say that all the time, but I think you can feel it now. There is one pathway, especially given the endless provocations against the Black community from the worst parts of law enforcement, with these videos that are coming out on a sometimes hourly basis now. Given the economic collapse that we're going through, given the fact that we're still in the middle of a plague, there is a pathway where we wind up with, even by the end of this summer, 5-6 American cities on fire, tanks in the streets, snipers on the rooftops from both sides, and a real downward spiral with more violence, less understanding. And there were a couple of moments in the past several days, it looked like that was where we were headed. And nobody that we care about wins in that scenario. The African American community is, we're only 13% of the country. The Jewish community, a tiny, tiny fraction of that. Some of the people who have set their minds against progress are large in numbers. They got a lot of guns and militia and all kinds of stuff. We don't want to go that route. I'm very happy, though, that it seems to me in the past 72 hours alone, a new continent of common ground has emerged as almost a miracle. God from the machine, this new continent of common ground. And it's not enough for you, it's not enough for me, but it sure is better than where we were headed. And it's better than where we were 2 or 3 weeks ago, where there is an understanding now, I think much broader than it's ever been, that racism, anti-Black racism, is more real than maybe people have been willing to accept because of this horrific lynching that was caught on video camera. And that was a lynching. A white man choking the life out of a Black man in broad daylight in front of a whole community of people who are screaming and yelling and saying he's dying, he's dying. The man calling for his mother, who's been long dead. The man urinating on himself. And 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, almost 9 minutes. And the whole world witnessed a lynching. And in this case, unlike all the others that came before, there can be no argument that the man was posing a threat. It was a split-second decision. What do you want the police to do? This was a cold-blooded act of dehumanizing violence. And in the face of that kind of horror, love has risen from the ashes. Love is rising from the ashes. And there's this continent of common ground that's emerged that racism is real. Certainly more real than a lot of people in America have been willing to accept, that there's something wrong with our police department and departments and the oversight there. By the time you get to the point where officers think it's okay, it's one thing if you have one road cop doing that and the other three tackle him. But when you have, 3 other police officers there and they essentially think it's okay, some of them, newer to the force than others, but any human being hearing people screaming, he's dying, he's dying, he's dying, you're killing me, you're killing him for many, many minutes. If you're not responding to that, that means that kind of behavior has become normalized. You've been doing that for a long time. You've been desensitized over time. Nobody starts off that horrific. And so there, I think an understanding, race is more real than we thought, than many of us thought. The police department more flawed than we had hoped. And there needs to be something done. Now that is a miracle. I've been trying to make that case for 25 years. I started out when I graduated from Yale Law School in 1993, working on police abuse issues, youth violence, juvenile justice, and trying to get just that basic understanding across was something I was unable to do for decades. And suddenly, in an instant, there's this common ground. What are we going to do with it? My view is that we have 3 obligations. If we meet them, we'll get through this stronger and better as a country. If we miss any of the 3, we're back in peril of moving on to that other track again, which nobody wants us to go down. Number 1, simply justice in the case. The officers, I'm an anti-prison activist, but some crimes do deserve incarceration, and strangling a man to death in broad daylight and with your body camera going and in front of the whole community is one of those crimes, and aiding and abetting it, failing to intervene is another. That needs to happen. If the police officers get off in this case, it's very hard to explain to the Black community that we're citizens here. Because if you can do that to an unarmed man who's begging for his life for almost 10 minutes, then you can do anything. And so that then puts you back on that other pathway. So there's got to be justice in the case. I'm glad that the Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has taken over the case, arrested the other officers. I think we're moving in the right direction there. But that's not enough. Number 2, you've got to have bipartisan legislation this year to do something to restore some checks and balances and some oversight to law enforcement. It's not that you hate police officers, that you want new laws, but any human system that does not have adequate checks and balances will tend toward corruption and abuse. That's why you have meat inspectors. Okay, you have meat inspectors, not because you hate butchers, you think all butchers are terrible. It's just, there are going to be enough butchers that cut corners that you've got to have oversight. That's why you have building inspectors, not because you hate construction workers, you hate architects, but there'll be enough bad actors in any system that if you don't have building inspectors, you're going to have a bunch of buildings falling down over time. And the same thing with law enforcement. I'm from a law enforcement family. Police officers are not saints, they're not superheroes, they are city employees, most good, some bad. But if you cannot get rid of the bad ones, and if the good ones are afraid to stand up to the bad ones, everyone is imperiled, because then you have lawlessness inside of law enforcement. And what we want is, we don't want lawlessness in the streets, and we also don't want lawlessness in the police precinct. And it's lawlessness inside of police departments that opens the door to lawlessness in the streets. And so you got to have that. You got to be able to ban the chokehold, change the training standards, make it easier to sue individual police officers. There are real reforms that could happen this year and need to happen this year. And third, you got a surge in economic support and relief to some of these communities that have been knocked flat because of the COVID shutdown and then burned out by some of the rioting. We can inject capital there. And then you've got a situation where you have justice in the case, legislation in the Congress, and economic relief in the streets. If you do those three things, we wind up stronger and better and safer and able to move forward together. And it's my hope that our communities can come together, as we always have in times of peril, where hate is rising, where the wrong people are using power in the wrong way, to push for a better and stronger democracy. The Black-Jewish Alliance, if there were ever a time to see it renewed, that time is now.
Wow, Van, that is awesome and inspiring and sort of hopeful and energizing. And I think it's exactly what so many of us who know your work expect of you. But I got to tell you, I can't think of a better way to end what's been a long day for us here. So thank you for that. And I really appreciate just where you started, just being clear about something. And I'll get on the record. I've said it in other places, but I'll say it here. As an organization that was founded over 100 years ago after a lynching, what happened to George Floyd absolutely, incontrovertibly was a lynching. And as the lynching that once galvanized the ADL, so too, I hope we can honor his memory and live up to his legacy by creating real change here and now. It won't bring back George Floyd. It won't comfort his family, but maybe, just maybe, we can make the world better so there are no more of these kinds of lynchings, as you said, in broad daylight on a street in Minneapolis.
Thank you.
I want to talk about what we can do, and we've got a lot of questions coming in from the chat, Van. A lot of people are interested in talking with us and talking with you. But what you think, you mentioned three things, and we certainly have our advocacy chops, and we do a lot of work in Washington. But how do you think the ADL, an anti-hate organization, how can we be most helpful to support the Black community, specifically communities of color in general, now in this moment?
Well, I think that most civil rights, civil liberties groups are going to push for, again, more checks and balances. I do think you have to have a better ability to sue and other things. But I think uniquely where we can come together is there is not enough screening for hate-based ideology in U.S. law enforcement. Our military has done a much better job. Our military is also infested with this white supremacist stuff as well. But our military has done a much better job of screening. The code of conduct is much more clear. U.S. law enforcement, there's literally thousands of agencies across the country. There's not like one federal police force. And as a result, hate groups have infiltrated U.S. law enforcement 100%. We should push to expunge them, to get the hate groups out of law enforcement. Because I don't care how many laws we change, if you have hateful people who have deliberately joined the department because they want to beat up Black people, or they want to beat up Mexicans, or they want to beat up Jewish people, you're never, ever going to be safe. So we should have a concerted effort between the Black and Jewish community to get the hate groups out, to help, and frankly, to help law enforcement get hate groups out of law enforcement. We can ally with 99% of law enforcement on this, but they do have a problem that has not been addressed.
So I'll just commit right now with you here today with, we've got almost 1,000 people watching, that ADL, whether it's working with the Reform Alliance, will commit to that.
Thank you.
Period. Sort of full
Thank
stop.
You, that's
something we can definitely get behind.
Thank you.
So how do you think, you're on CNN, and again, I think you're a voice of conscience there, but a question that's come in that I really agree with is, how do we hold American media accountable in sort of reframing how our Black brothers and sisters are portrayed? I mean, so often you only get the worst of the worst stories. And it starts out with this narrative that becomes very difficult to sort of like reframe. Like, how do we fix that, would you say?
I wish I had a better answer than I do. I mean, a lot of it, the local news is even worse than the national news. I mean, you watch local news, if it bleeds, it leads, is what they say. And if if the only thing you knew about Black people is what you saw in the local news, you'd be terrified of me. I don't have a great answer. All I know is that across the board, the sensationalism, the stuff that, going for clicks and ratings and likes and shares and that kind of stuff is just ruining the national conversation across the board. For instance, I saw tremendously encouraging images of police kneeling with protesters, walking with protesters, hugging protesters. I did not see that shown as often as I saw some of the also very, very bad acts that you saw at some of the protests where the police were being violent. I would love to see both images being shown equally. You've seen the best and the worst of law enforcement over this past 10 to 14 days. And, we tend to show the negative of law enforcement, of African Americans, of whoever it is. So all I know is that, I just did a Sesame Street special, trying to teach kids about racism, and I hope we get to do some more. I think it's about showing the examples of the positive. Whatever you focus on is going to grow. And I think if we showed more examples of positive things, we would have more positive outcomes. But I'm doing the best I can. If I had that answer, I would be in charge of a major news organization instead of working for one.
Well, let me ask you a related question then. We spend a lot of time at ADL. We have a center in Silicon Valley looking at the platforms and what's the role of the platforms in social media. Like, how do you think about that and what role they're playing in perpetuating narratives, or maybe what they should be doing to try to solve that?
Well, look, I call most social media anti-social media. And I think they should change the name of Twitter. I think they should change the name of Twitter to hater, because the same person who on Instagram is happy and showing off, their beautiful meal, and who on Facebook is sad and talking about how their life sucks, on Twitter is attacking you and everybody else. There's something about Twitter that just brings out the worst in people. I don't know why that is, but I love Jack Dorsey. He's been, I think, very concerned about this. He's actually supported the Reform Alliance in getting PPE into prisons, so that the people who work in prisons, the guards, and people who live there, who are incarcerated, can survive this virus. So I love I love Jack Dorsey, but there's something going on with Twitter. I call it anti-social media.
Yeah, it's really ugly. And, we're seeing, by the way, extremist elements, whether they're white supremacists or Russian trolls, as you were talking about before, trying to exploit this moment and stoke the divisions, right? And kind of feed the animosity. It's really ugly.
I think here's the deal. I wish that the tech companies would be more attentive and attuned, but we have to be more attentive and attuned. What are we liking and sharing? And some big headline comes, we share it with everybody, and then half a day later, it turns out it was totally bogus, but we've already been a part of spreading the infection. We have to be much more careful. As we are 140 some days away from a national election, we know for sure there are foreign powers that would love for us to tear ourselves apart, and they have weaponized disinformation. And so just like we don't want to accidentally be a carrier for COVID, a non-symptomatic carrier for COVID. We also don't want to be non-symptomatic carriers for these disinformation viruses that we can cough on our friends and neighbors and make all of us sick.
Yeah, here. So getting back to your point about police, another question that's come in, you were talking about there are many police who are kneeling. There are lots of police who work for the good. What do you make of these calls to defund the police? And how do you think about?
I think it's terrible. You don't even have to go into it. It's terrible. And I'll tell you why. We just got to this common ground that racism is more real and the police need more fixing than we knew. Let us consolidate that consensus. That's a new consensus for a lot of Americans. A month ago, these issues were not on their radar screen. If they were, it's like issue number 97 or issue number 17. Right. Certainly not front of mind issues. to take this moment and then to go all the way over into something that's going to divide, I think is unwise. We don't need to defund the police. We may need to retrain them, demilitarize them. We may need to rebalance some of the expenditures so that we have enough going for the support that the cops need. Listen, I'm from a law enforcement family. The police don't like going into neighborhoods where they're expected to be social workers and therapists and peacekeepers and domestic counselors and crime solvers and fight breaker-uppers and bouncers. They don't like being burdened in the way that they are. And so we can rebalance our expenses so that we have more of those counselors and social programs and all those things. But rebalancing is not the same as defunding. That sounds punitive. Yes. It sounds nuts to most people because most people want to be able to call a police officer if something happens to them. And I tell you what, if you're a Democrat, and this is not a partisan thing, but you couldn't come up with a dumber strategy to drive. You couldn't come up with a better strategy to drive people away from progressives.
Right. Here. It's funny. We were talking to Eric Garcetti earlier today, and Mayor Garcetti talked about unpolicing, like investing resources, not just in patrolling, right, and not just in an adversarial way, but how do we build communities and invest in them? I thought it was a very smart kind of play. I want to ask you one last question.
Sure. I'm sorry.
Go, Van. Sorry, go.
I just want to say, I think for normal people, they just want peaceful streets, which means you don't want knuckleheads out there acting like idiots and, whether they have on a badge or not. You want the knucklehead caucus inside the law enforcement and on the streets to be given something else to do. If you're going to be a knucklehead, you shouldn't be a cop. And if you're a knucklehead in the community, hopefully we can find you a job or get you some counseling, do something. But if not, you can't be out here making a fool of yourself and scaring people in the community. That's common sense. Once you sound like you're anti-law enforcement, it sounds like you're anti-peaceful streets. And that doesn't make any sense.
100%. So one last question before we close. Tell us, if you would, Van, who are your heroes? Like, who are the people who really give you inspiration? I think it would help a lot of us as we kind of close here today and think about what we're learning in this moment. Who inspires you?
Well, look, some of the people that inspire me, you can't talk to because they're not with us anymore. My father, Willie Anthony Jones, who was born in poverty and segregation in Memphis, Tennessee in 1944. He joined the military to get out of poverty. Everybody else was running out of the military. My dad ran into the military so he could get out of poverty. He put himself through college, a little black college called Lane College, married the college president's daughter, my mother, because my dad was no dummy. And he put his whole, my dad put his brother through college. He put his cousin through college. I mean, my dad, everybody who got out of poverty in my family came out of poverty on this bridge called my father's back. And when he died, the picture we put of him on the funeral program was him standing in front of Yale Law School the day I graduated with his fist in the air, saying, "Look, you're a ninth generation American son. You're the first one in this family born with all your rights. And look at what you did." And I've always tried to live up to him and what he did with nothing, with all the blessings that he gave me and my mom gave me. And so the most inspiring person I ever knew, you guys won't be able to track down, but Nelson Mandela's not too bad either. Number 2 to my dad.
Thank you for blessing us with that story, man. That's a powerful and I think perfect way to end this talk. We've got some of the best analysts in the United States on extremism. I'm making the commitment today. We will work on this issue of trying to extinguish extremism from law enforcement. We'll follow up on that. Thanks for all you do, and just God bless.
Hey, listen, God bless you and God bless this organization. Listen, this is a time for courage. It's a time for leadership. Those of us from communities that have suffered through, we know what happens when this train ends up where it's going. This train is not pointed in the right direction. And if we just hope it turns around, it doesn't turn around. It gets worse and worse and worse. You don't have to tell Black people that. You sure as hell don't have to tell Jewish people that. So we're ahead of the game. Our communities, we're ahead of the game. So we can plan, we can prepare. Everybody's going to be, I wonder I don't have to wonder nothing. You're Jewish, I'm Black. We already read the script. So,
Yeah,
we can get together and we can save everybody like we always do. We always get there first. We always fight the hardest. We understand. And so the country needs us. They need us to come together. Let's stay together.
Bravo. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.